So hey everybody, I just wanted to make a video and talk to you a little bit about why I would be transitioning at 60 when you're used to probably seeing young people do the transition at a much earlier phase in their lives. But I want you to know that older people also transition and that we all transition for the very same reason. And the very same reason that we transition is gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the sense that something's not right in your body. It can really be debilitating. It can cause various effects as you go through life. For example, some trans people have very high rates of suicide. You may find trans people in situations where they're either working jobs where they don't actually have to work face to face with other people, or they may be ashamed of their bodies. They may not be able to look in the mirror. There are many, many aspects to gender dysphoria. And the whole idea of transition is to make your body in alignment with what your brain says you should be. Now that takes many, many forms depending on the people. A lot of trans girls and a lot of trans men, when we actually start transition or when we actually accomplish our transitions or finish them, then we actually become more successful in life. And this has been my experience. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the events of my life and what's led me to this point. So from my own experience, when I was young, I really didn't feel like I fit in. So I was gentler, I was more effeminate. I much preferred the company of girls as opposed to the company of boys. This didn't really go over very well in the rural district or the farming school where I went to. Mostly farm kids, country background, very rough place to be in many aspects. And so I learned to essentially be a loner. I ultimately left school early. I didn't get an education. I had grade 8 education and stayed that way until well into my 30s. This was part of the direction my life was going: substance abuse, and I needed to turn a negative into a positive. So I learned to cover up my femininity. I didn't understand that people could transition. I didn't really understand that the possibility existed. What I did instead was I tried to cover it up. I took up martial arts. I did skydiving. I took up fast cars. I took up high-risk endeavors, all in an effort to cover it up. So by doing alpha male things, I thought I could get away from the truth that was inside of me. This actually wasn't the case. All I did was delay the inevitable. Ultimately, when you have severe gender dysphoria, you have to deal with it. My life was going nowhere. At a certain point, I ran into troubles in life, troubles that I couldn't really get over. And that was the beginning of my going back to school. And it was also the beginning of me starting to understand about being transgender. I went back to school in the early 1990s. I went back to university and I did my grade 12 and I started on a degree. At this point, the internet was becoming popular. Because the internet was becoming popular, I was able to explore ideas using the internet and the technologies that were available to us at that point. And I started to understand about gender dysphoria, and I started to understand about transition and that there were other trans people out there. I wasn't the only one. And this made a big difference in my life. Now, from that point, it was still 20 years before I could work up the courage to start transition. But it was the beginning. It took a long time. I had a lifetime of being socialized as a male. I had a lifetime of it being expected that I would behave in male ways. And I had had a lifetime of basically being told I was male and that if I acted effeminate, that there was something wrong with me, that I was queer. In those days, queer was a very negative connotation, and I had to deal with that, not just from the people around me, but also from my mother, from my family. This was a big deal in those days. So back to school and actually learning about trans people. Actually, when I was in school, I encountered trans people. I encountered a couple of trans people. My first exposure to it. On the other hand, I was involved in men's clubs, and all of my friends were what we would probably call rednecks. They definitely leaned to the right of center. And the idea of me being considered transgender or being considered girly, or that I might be gay, or any of these kinds of ideas, any inkling that I was a member of the LGBTQ plus family would have caused my social dismemberment or my social outcasting. And I was terrified. So I remember at one point, this would be about 2017, I had started to actually think about transition. I started talking to a counselor. This was in downtown Vancouver. And I remember going downtown Vancouver wearing sandals, and my toenails were painted. I believe I had my toenails with red nail polish on them. And even though I lived 60 miles outside of Vancouver, when I was walking from my car to the office where the psychologist lived, I was terrified. I was terrified that somebody I knew might see me walking dressed in sandals with nail polish. I felt like everybody was looking at me. It was not really, this was a process of coming out. It was not a pleasant experience, but it was one that I had to go through. To the point now where I can actually sit here and make a video and put it on YouTube and talk to you about it. This is also a part of my therapy. So ultimately, I saw a different therapist in the end, not because of my toenails, but I saw a different therapist in the end because she was much more qualified, and I felt much more comfortable. Rather than the government-sponsored person, I actually went to somebody who was being paid by my extended medical. And it was, for me, very, very much of an experience. The reason I'd gone to the therapist was that I needed a psychologist to approve me to get hormones so that I could actually start physical transition. This was 2017. So I had started taking hormones. My spouse had gotten a prescription for a gelatin that you would smear on your leg, and it contained estrogen. And somebody else I knew had given me a prescription, actually what was left of their prescription after they'd had some surgery, of testosterone blockers. So I had estrogen, I had testosterone blockers, and I started taking those. This was strictly off book. This wasn't under medical supervision. And I'd done so because I was terrified that the psychologist was going to tell me no. She was going to say, no, you're not transgender enough. You don't pass well enough. All of these thoughts that went through my head. And so I started taking these drugs so that they couldn't take me off them. That was the fear I had. So I started taking estrogen and spironolactone, and eventually I went and I got the appointment with the psychologist. And I remember at one point she said, so why did you start taking these drugs illegally? And I said, because this way, you can't tell me no. You have to continue with the drugs because my body is now operating partially on these hormones. So I was really shocked. The psychologist told me that she wasn't there to stop me from getting the hormones. She told me that she was there to enable me. She told me that she would help me and that whether or not I was taking the hormones had nothing to do with it. And she wrote a report, recommended me for hormones. It was in about November of 2017 that I actually officially started transition, medically supervised, under the direction of a doctor. I had an endocrinologist, and he prescribed me with estrogen patches and spirulactin and progesterone. That was the very beginning. Not too long after that, I got sick. I didn't know I was sick, but at that point, I already had had some cancer growing in my body. I changed doctors. About February of 2018, I changed doctors. And I went from patches to injectable estradiol valerate. And I changed my prescription for progesterone to prometrium, which is a bioidentical hormone. As soon as my estrogen or my testosterone levels got low enough, I stopped taking the spirulactin. So for the last 6 years, my levels have been maintained strictly by estrogen and prometrium. My testosterone levels are low. I've experienced the body changes I was looking for. I stayed on my hormones, but because I was dealing with very, very serious and aggressive cancer, I left all of the other parts of transition aside. And now here I am, 63 years old. The doctors have told me that I'm clear. They've told me it's not coming back, and pretty soon I'll be discharged from cancer care, and I'm starting my transition again. And I am feeling so good. I'm feeling so successful, and I'm feeling like I am absolutely unstoppable. Okay, so that's enough for now. I will talk to you more about this coming up. I want to talk to you about success, a bunch of things I want to share with you. Remember, if you like this video, please like it, subscribe, maybe click on the little bell button to actually get notifications. I love each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.